So I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about the work that I did with my PhD advisor, Ingolf Becker. So in this case, we were interested in investigating why people might be susceptible to phishing emails. And the hypothesis here was that people might tend to overlook certain details that you can find in typically displayed email headers that contain, for instance, sender details. So in this talk, I'll walk you through the experimental setup and mention the key results that we had. So we know that the threat of phishing is still growing, and that in fact nearly half of the modern security breaches nowadays involve some form of phishing. And this means that purely technical solutions to filter out phishing emails are not sufficient apparently to prevent people from falling for them. So that means in order to improve people's ability to detect these emails, we need to gain a deeper understanding of why do people actually fall for phishing in the first place. So some previous works have relied on information processing theory from cognitive sciences, which says that there are two different routes with which people process information, the central route and a peripheral route. So the central route actually relates a little bit to what David Rand was talking about, where people very carefully appraise information that they see. Where you can imagine if you're browsing your emails, you might rely more on a peripheral information processing route where you don't necessarily carefully appraise every detail you see in an email. So that leads to the idea that people actually might miss or misinterpret cues that actually give away the suspiciousness of an email. So what we were testing here is more specifically is whether people have a blind spot perhaps for certain details that you find in the typically displayed email headers. So I'm not talking about the big technical headers as we saw in the morning, but what you typically see as a subject line, the sender name and the sender email address. So our central hypothesis was that people should be better at detecting phishing emails with these suspicious header details when they are only presented with these user-facing email headers. So we tested this with a between subjects design with 3 groups, starting with the control group, where we presented a set of emails to participants with both the email header as well as the email message. And then in the second group, bodiless, we presented them the same set of emails, but we only presented the user-facing email header. And in the headerless condition, as you might expect, we only presented the subject line and the body part of the email. And then people's task in this case was to imagine they were working as an executive assistant in a fictive company setting where they had to process emails for their boss. And they saw emails one by one. You can see an example here in the control version where the email display mimicked that of Gmail. And then underneath that, there were 2 options. They had to either discard the email or say, hey, this needs my boss's attention. And when they would click on discard, they had to indicate a specific reason for why to do so. It's either as an executive assistant, they could take care of this, or they could label it as spam, phishing, or give another reason. And if it was other, they had to specify with free text what would be the reason. In this case, it was very important for us that we had a sample that was representative of the general population. We gathered these people through Prolific, and throughout the whole task, we also tracked people's user interactions. So that allowed us to see if people actually hovered over, for instance, suspicious URLs that we also had in some of the phishing emails. So for the email set, we had 32 legitimate emails that we adapted from the Enron emails database. And for the phishing emails, we made sure we had a wide range of flavors, starting with 2 spear phishing or CEO fraud type of phishing emails. Then we had 2 examples of Nigerian prince scams, 2 examples of a security warning where people had to change their password on a malicious website, and then a malicious file sharing link, as well as a Zoom scam, as emerged during the pandemic, where people were sent an email saying, hey, you missed this Zoom conference, click on this link to retrieve the recording, which actually led to downloading some malicious file. So here we specifically expected these 5 phishing emails to be detectable by only looking at these header details. So then we computed for every of these 8 phishing emails how many people in each of the conditions labeled it as phishing. And for the 5 emails that we just indicated, we actually see that the ones that did not see the body message of the email, but only the email header, were actually not necessarily better than in the control condition at detecting them, which we found quite surprising. And from this, we concluded that most people actually do not recognize deception tactics that cybercriminals often use when they craft these phishing emails. Then next, we looked at how many people actually hovered over any of the malicious links that we had in half of the phishing emails, as you can see here. And you can tell that nearly nobody actually hovered over the emails. And out of the people that actually did hover over the emails, actually they did not seem to recognize that the URL was suspicious. Namely, they did not label that email as phishing or spam. So from here, we would conclude that common email security recommendations, such as hovering over URLs, are not really applied in practice by the general public. So for the last part here, we were interested in why do perhaps certain people fall more for phishing. So this relies on the idea that there might be a certain demographic that seems particularly susceptible to phishing. In the past, people have looked at gender, people with low tech affinity, the elderly, people who are less educated, and different types of personality traits. But the issue with those kinds of studies is that often they were inconsistent and therefore inconclusive due to different methods that they applied. You can think of different sampling biases or even biases within the phishing emails that they used to measure people's ability to detect phishing. So in our study, we had all kinds of personal traits as well, namely demographics like age, gender, education level, and income, some information about people's past experiences regarding receiving phishing emails, as well as a question about their subjective indication of how good they are at cybersecurity. Then we had some questions relating to privacy concerns and the big 5 personality traits. And we tried to predict people's actual phishing detection ability with these 4 different types of factors. First of all, we defined phishing detection ability as phishing detection recall, which means out of all the 8 phishing emails that we showed to them, how many did they actually label as phishing? And we did the same for phishing detection precision. So out of all the emails that people thought were phishing, how many were actually phishing? And from all these hierarchical regressions that we ran, we did not find any consistent prediction from any of these personal traits to these metrics of phishing detection ability. So we conclude here that personal traits are not a reliable source to see how susceptible people are to phishing. So in terms of the main takeaways here, we found that people do not recognize online deception tactics. Secondly, that personal traits do not reliably predict phishing susceptibility. And that means that we need different tools that actually help people to detect phishing emails better. With that, thank you for your attention.